Alright, so, a couple things to get out of the way before we start. First, I know I promised that my next video would be the missing link in competitive Overwatch, but then, surprise, turns out the Overwatch League is about to be set on fire again, and I've made the executive decision to hold off on that video until whatever they're doing gets resolved and I can pick through the pieces to see what's worth including. Second, usually videos come out once every other week on this channel, but next week is just a really busy week for me, so I've decided to release this video a week early so I can spend that time focusing on passing all my courses. The schedule will resume as normal in February, but consider this video just to be next week's video a week early. With that out of the way, let's get to the video. I wasn't initially intending on making a video on this topic until I saw this clip on Twitter.
My hot take is Roadhog has the most fairest one shot in the game. It's so fair that you have no idea.
It is a bad take, and I want to talk about why in a video that I'm making because my dumb monkey brain sees analytics trending downwards and I am desperately trying to correct for that. Anyways, so, first of all, what are we talking about when we're talking one-shots, and which heroes does it actually apply to? Now, I know that this might seem obvious, but it actually is a little bit more complicated than that might suggest. For our purposes, I'm going to draw some lines in the sand about what I consider to make something a one-shot ability or not, and I'd be interested to hear what you guys think about this in the comments because it is actually surprisingly hard to draw the line on some of these. If we included literally every hero in the game who could, under optimal conditions, get a one-shot kill, we'd be here all day, especially if we extended that to include things like damage over time, ultimates, all that stuff. To get to the core of the issue, it's important for us to define what is, or more importantly isn't, a one-shot ability or combo. To do this, we're going to narrow down the list of heroes who possess at least one one-shot ability or combo. And we're going to be talking about, like, eliminating them from being able to do literally anything that might result in someone dying in one shot or in a one-shot combo. I'm going to list out the criteria one by one, and if a hero can no longer one-shot an enemy after that criteria in any way, then they'll get grayed out. Some heroes are going to have an asterisk, though, because they're doing their own thing, and I want to address it separately so that I don't get comments about it. So, abilities count as a one-shot in the absence of all of the following criteria. 1. It takes too much time or just objectively doesn't come close to any sort of a one-shot. Moira's damage orb can technically kill a 200 HP target by itself, but frankly, if you get mauled by a sloth, you kind of deserve what you got. 2. They can only one-shot Tracer. For it to be a proper one-shot, it needs to be fatal to at least a 200 HP target, 250 ideally. 3. They can only one-shot with multiple damage modifiers in effect. If you need Mercy, Damage Amp, and a Zen Discord Orb on a target, that doesn't count. 4. If multiple abilities are collectively making up the one-shot for a combo, then the effectiveness of each ability has to rely on the success of the previous steps in a particular order, and the combo has to be consistently reproducible in changing circumstances. If the order is irrelevant or can yield wildly different outcomes in different circumstances, then it doesn't count. 5. If multiple abilities are collectively making up the one-shot, then melee cannot be part of the combo unless the combo inherently involves the target being in melee range or being brought into melee range. 6. The one-shot is either an ult by itself, or it relies on an ultimate ability for the damage boost necessary to be a one-shot. Junkrat's Tire doesn't count, and neither does anything that requires an amplification matrix. 7. The one-shot can only be executed in an extremely narrow range. Roadhog's right-click can one-shot you, but the range is so narrow that it's functionally out of the Roadhog's control whether or not he'll actually land the one-shot of it. 8. The one-shot relies on an environmental factor. If it involves another player falling off the map or being knocked into a wall, it's too situational to count as a one-shot. 9. The combo involved relies on multiple skill shots in a row. Zenyatta can wipe out a 200 HP target with a fully charged right-click, and Genji can do the same by hitting a triple headshot plus a dash, but this goes beyond a combo and into just hitting a lot of shots. 10. For our final criteria. The average 200 HP target has substantial personal agency in terms of what happens to them once the one-shot is initially executed. For a one-shot to be a proper one-shot, your life is in the hands of the person who's trying to kill you and potentially your teammates. With all that out of the way, we're left with 5 heroes who can still one-shot, although before we address them, I want to get into my honorable mentions real quick. Ashe, Cassidy, Junkrat, and Ana don't really fit my criteria, but I felt like I still needed to at least acknowledge them in some way because they can all do some bullshit that feels like it should count but just doesn't based on this criteria, and I know that if I don't acknowledge them, then I'm just going to get comments about it. Ashe and Cassidy are a problem for the same reason. They can both shoot you in the face and then blow you up, and it will kill you. Both of these fail the criteria for requiring a particular order, but the lack of personal autonomy in this situation I think makes it important enough to at least include it. Once the combo has been initially successfully executed, very few heroes in the 200 HP health range have the ability to stop it from killing them. Junkrat is here because he is some stupid bullshit that can just output unhinged amounts of damage very quickly. The Junkrat combo, as much as it pains me to say this, is better categorized as hitting a series of skill shots rather than a one-shot, even if the skill required is low compared to something like a Zenyatta or Genji combo. I'll be honest, I'm mad about this too because I really felt like he should be included, and for all intents and purposes, I feel like he is. But I think my own criteria removes him from contention, and to try and change it around to include him would only mess things up more. Ana has a combo that, even without a damage boost, can kill you, and you can't do much about it. It succeeds in terms of needing both the correct order of abilities and the lack of personal autonomy. Almost. The reason it's not being included here is because it also fails part of that personal autonomy criteria. Your fate just isn't only in the hands of Ana or your teammates. Ana's teammates can wake up her target and ruin the combo, and technically there's just enough time to move out of the way of the second Ana dart before it kills you. It takes players 0.5 seconds to wake up after taking damage while slept, and Ana fires at a rate of 1 shot per 0.8 seconds. 0.3 seconds is a pretty small window, but between that window, the ability for Ana's teammates to mess it up, and the fact that Ana's darts and grenades can also be blocked by her own teammates, she definitely deserves an honorable mention, but just not a place on the list. With that out of the way, let's talk about our 5 menaces. Roadhog, Sigma, Hanzo, Sojourn, and Widowmaker. Widow and Hanzo are the most straightforward, being able to instantly kill most of the roster with a fully charged headshot. I don't think anyone's going to dispute that. Sojourn is in a bit of a unique position, given that she's the only one of the bunch who genuinely relies on a damage boost to knock someone down from 200 HP at full health, but based on our criteria, it does still count. Roadhog and Sigma both rely on a combo where the initial ability is a stun of some sort, followed by their primary fire being used on the target who can't do anything about it. For Roadhog, it's the hook, left click, and melee. For Sigma, it's the boulder followed by a left click. So we've defined what a one-shot is for our purposes and provided a framework for understanding what specifically does and doesn't qualify as a one-shot. Being fully honest, this process has been reverse engineered, starting from an understanding of the heroes that the community tends to identify as one-shots, and trying to identify criteria that they meet but no one else does. It is not perfect, I'll be the first to admit it, and I think there's a lot of room for disagreement, but we have to start with something or we'll just talk in circles all day. With that in mind, let's move on to the second section of the video. Are all one-shots equal? A big part of the discussion around one-shot abilities is that they aren't fun to play against, that they're too strong, and that there's no counterplay. I personally am not a fan of the "it's not fun to play against" argument, and I think that being too strong is subjective, but I do think that the lack of counterplay is the core issue here. The reason they're not fun to play against, and the reason people feel like they're so strong, is because there isn't counterplay. So, to me, that suggests that when we're looking at whether or not all one-shots are made equal, we need to consider what kind of counterplay exists and the nature of that counterplay. And the first thing that needs to be considered is whether or not a hero is vulnerable to the same one-shot mechanic that they are introducing. Of the 5 menaces who can one-shot you by our criteria, there are 3 of whom can also be one-shot by the same mechanic that they introduce. Widowmaker can be one-shot by a Widow, Hanzo can be one-shot by a Hanzo, and Sojourn can be one-shot by a Sojourn. And all 3 of them can also one-shot each other as well. This is actually a really important factor to consider when we're talking about one-shots, because it's something that distinguishes those 3 from both Roadhog and Sigma. Roadhog and Sigma cannot do unto Roadhog and Sigma what they do unto you. Roadhog's combo will not kill another Roadhog, and Sigma's combo will not kill another Sigma. Not just that, but Widowmaker, Hanzo, and Sojourn can all be one-shot by either of the tanks, but cannot return the favor. This is a one-way one-shot. We also do need to consider the difficulty of pulling off the one-shot consistently. With a Widowmaker, it's pretty hard. You're rarely going to land it simply because it's a hard shot. Hanzo's is a little easier, I guess, because you can pre-fire your projectiles, so you don't have to have them directly lined up in your sights at the moment, but you do have to deal with drop-off and stuff like that. And Sojourn's is easier than Hanzo's in my opinion, because she has abilities that can make it easier for her to pressure her targets into her optimal range. Sigma isn't especially hard to do once a target is lined up, but it does still require you to land the rock and the next left click, which it is possible to fail. Of the 5, I would argue that Roadhog's is the easiest, since the hook is pretty easy to hit and automatically lines up both the left click and the melee. The last factor that we're going to consider here is how punishable the heroes actually are. We talked about whether or not they're vulnerable to their own mechanics, but that's not all that matters. Can other heroes also take them down? Again, with Widow, she is pretty vulnerable. Scoping in slows down her movement, and her one-shot requires her to do so. If she's being targeted by a Tracer or Genji who's flanking her, her only real options are to try and grapple away, to try and land a lucky headshot, or to try and kill them with her assault rifle, none of which are ideal for her. Hanzo is definitely less vulnerable to getting dived, but this is also counterbalanced by the fact that his reliance on projectiles makes him vulnerable to aerial heroes like Pharah or Echo, as well as longer range heroes like an Ashe who don't have to try to account for gravity with their shot. Sojourn is pretty hard to punish, thanks to generally having pretty high damage output even excluding her one-shot on top of her high mobility, but again, she is still only a 200 HP target. At the end of the day, a Sojourn can still get popped a lot easier than a tank. Speaking of, when it comes to the tanks, I don't think it's a controversial argument to say that it's a lot easier to punish a Sigma than a Roadhog in this context. A Roadhog's self-heal can enable him to keep the fight going a lot longer than Sigma's Black Hole or Barrier can, since both of those can just be waited out or walked around. Not only does Roadhog have 700 base HP, but his Take a Breather ability restores 350 of it on top of providing a 50% damage reduction for 2 seconds. When we're talking about one-shot counterplay, these 3 questions are really important. Can a hero who introduces a one-shot mechanic be counterplayed with those same mechanics? How difficult is it to execute the one-shot? If a hero can execute a one-shot, how punishable are they? And in answering these questions about Overwatch, we can see heroes like Widowmaker falling into a category of glass cannons. Heroes who are very strong, but also very fragile, as well as heroes like Roadhog, where there's not really a trade-off between strength and fragility. A major issue with one-shots is the personal autonomy of the target of the one-shot. The final criteria we mentioned before was that a hero needed to have little to no control over their fate once the one-shot is initially successfully executed. Even compared to other heroes that people are annoyed by like Sombra, there's still the potential for counterplay once she hacks you. You can influence the outcome of your own fate with her. But there's nothing you can do to counterplay getting domed by Widow or hooked by Roadhog other than either hiding from them or killing them before they can kill you. And as we've discussed, while you can do that with some of these heroes, you cannot do it with all of them. But before this video gets too long, let's move on to the final section. Should one-shot abilities exist? This is a question that goes beyond just balance changes and asks a more fundamental question about balance philosophy. What kind of a game should Overwatch be? Should it be the kind of game where you can be instantly killed without warning and at a range where you potentially can't do anything about it? If it is, then what skill floor should be necessary to do so, and how high should the skill ceiling for that go? Should there be heroes who cannot be one-shot, or should every character be vulnerable to an instant kill in some form? What level of risk should be involved with such a high level of reward? As much as these seem like maybe hypotheticals or even potentially really obvious answers, they're important to know the answer to. And not just because of what they say about these 5 heroes. If Overwatch is a game where you should be able to be killed instantly without warning, that influences whether abilities like Mercy's Resurrection or Baptiste's Immortality Field should exist as counterplay to that. If Overwatch is a game where one-shots should be high risk, high reward, then we have to consider how each individual hero who's capable of a one-shot can be punished. If we want to increase the risk to Roadhog, we might introduce more anti-heal mechanics or nerf Kiriko's protection Suzu so that she can enable him. If we wanted to increase the risk for, like, Sojourn, we might lower her total health or increase the damage she takes while her railgun is fully charged or something like that. If we accept that certain heroes should be invulnerable to one-shots, which we currently do, tanks are by and large pretty invulnerable to them, then it raises the opposite question of whether or not it's acceptable for tanks to have one-shot abilities or combos at all. And the questions that we're asking, as well as the answers to them, are obviously pretty heavily influenced by where we draw the line on what is or is not a one-shot. Again, I've narrowed it down to these 5, but I think you can make a pretty compelling case for using different criteria to narrow it down in a different way so that a hero like Reinhardt is included, but maybe Sojourn isn't, and that would affect your outcomes. My criteria also left Ana as an honorable mention, but if you ran with different criteria, you could absolutely make the case that she should be included, and with that, you raise the question of whether or not a support should be allowed to have a one-shot. And I mean, if you included environmental kills in this, then half the roster has the potential to either knock you into a wall for a one-shot kill or combo, or knock you off the map. However, while those discussions are interesting, and I hope to see a lot of them in the comments section, we don't have all day to consider them. I've narrowed it down to 5 heroes who meet my criteria, and I think that we can use them to draw some lines in the sand. In my opinion, and again, this is subjective, at the end of the day, one-shot abilities should be allowed to exist, but only if the hero who introduces it is also vulnerable to it, if the ability itself has a high skill floor, and that any one-shot potential is being offset by their vulnerability to counterplay. Heroes with one-shot abilities are just objectively incredibly strong, and because of that, their kits need to incorporate built-in weaknesses to account for those strengths. I think that the hero who represents the most compelling case for being allowed to one-shot heroes is Widowmaker, and I would say that Hanzo generally meets the mark as well. Sojourn, Roadhog, and Sigma, on the other hand, don't. Sojourn is just too good at too many things, while Sigma and Roadhog both can't be one-shot by the same one-shot mechanics that they introduce. All 3 of these heroes bring too much strength and not enough weakness, and a big part of that for Roadhog and Sigma in particular is that they're not supposed to be weak. They're tanks. Tanks are supposed to be the hardest heroes in the game to kill, and I think that that's totally fine. That's an important role for them to fill. But then they shouldn't also have such an easy time eliminating other heroes from the game. Even when you consider other tanks who can instantly kill enemies under certain criteria that we've previously said makes them ineligible for this, the conditions still require a lot more vulnerability. D.Va can instantly kill enemies with either of her ults, but for her self-destruct, she has to make herself extremely vulnerable in pilot form, and to get a mech kill, she has to get right up close to an enemy while she's in that vulnerable pilot form. Reinhardt can get an instant kill with his Shatter at extremely close range, but that's overwhelmingly pretty easy to avoid, relatively speaking, and while his charge can get an instant kill on a target, it relies on being able to either knock somebody off the map or into a wall, and either way, he not only risks putting himself out of position and making himself a sitting duck for the enemy team in doing so, but he also leaves his teammates vulnerable if he runs away with his barrier. And again, ults are necessarily meant to be powerful. Of course, you can do a lot with them. A ton of heroes have ults that could be used to instantly kill someone, but that's what makes them ultimate abilities that you should be working hard to charge and then using strategically. I'm not saying it's not annoying, but it is very much so one thing to be instantly killed by an ultimate, especially one that you could have, theoretically destroyed, like a Junkrat tire, or had time to hide from like a D.Va bomb. But it's another entirely for a hero to have the potential to instantly delete you as a core part of their kit in standard gameplay. At a bare minimum, developers considering one-shot abilities should be cognizant of the golden rule. Only allow someone to do unto others what can be done unto them. And that's where I'm going to end this one. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this, be sure to like and subscribe for more, turn on notifications, all that good stuff, and let me know your thoughts on the topic in the comments. Be sure to follow me on Twitch at twitch.tv/thevivaros. The link to that and all my other accounts will be in the description. If you want more from me, YouTube is about to recommend a video for you, but if you want my personal recommendation, I'd suggest checking out my most recent video, Tilting is a Skill Issue. Both of those will pop up in just a second, and until next time, I'll see you soon.